Hello everyone, this is Sana Pirzada, author of The Raven's Call. The Raven's Call was published last month. The paperback versions are available at Liberty Books within Pakistan, and the Kindle version is available on amazon.co.uk. I'm here today to address some of the questions that you've all had with regards to the book, the writing process, the process of being a self-published author, and certain tips that I might share with you for budding writers. So firstly, let me start with saying a big thank you to all of those who have actually read the book, and those people in particular who have shared some brilliant feedback and brilliant reviews on the book. I thank you so much for taking out the time and for reading the book. What inspired me to write The Raven's Call? So, as you may or you may not know, I am a Gothic fiction writer. My first book, The Rose Within, a Gothic romance, was published in 2016. The second book, Vernon Hall and Other Stories, a collection of short Gothic stories, was published in 2019. And then my third book, Naomi Byron, a Victorian legal thriller, was published in 2020. It wasn't quite a piece of Gothic fiction, it was a little different. It was a legal thriller but set in Victorian times. And The Raven's Call is my fourth book. I've always been fascinated with the Gothic tradition and writers such as Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, Daphne du Maurier and their works. And that combined with books like Agatha Christie's Poirot series, as well as the Sherlock Holmes stories, have played an important part in my imagination and in my life as well. And that is partly what inspired me to write The Raven's Call. But as a writer, one has to be extremely imaginative and to keep creating different sorts of scenarios, which I've been doing. And my particular setting is the Victorian era, and I'll come to that in a moment as to why I prefer that particular setting. And this is what primarily inspired me to write this book, as well as the fact that I've had this beautiful story, beautiful yet painful story going on in my head, and I wanted to translate that into a story, into a proper novel. As you may or you may not know, I am a self-published writer. What that means is that I don't have an agent and I don't have a publishing company that does all of the things that I've had to do either single-handedly or I've had to seek help from individual people. For example, getting the cover made, purchasing the ISBN barcode, having the books printed myself. And whereas being a self-published writer has its own challenges, it has proven to be a rather fruitful process for me, because what that has meant is that I haven't really submitted my manuscript to agents or to publishing companies, and I haven't had to wait for a response, a positive or a negative one. I've just gone ahead and done what I've wanted to do, because writing for me isn't something that is to appease an audience. It's to appease your own soul and your own your own desires, which is what I've been doing over the years. So some people do ask me as to what the writing procedure is, or the process of being a self-published author. And you have those routes available to you. There is vanity publishing that's available as well, or what's called hybrid publishing. And obviously that has an impact on royalties and other things as well. But for me, being a self-published author, whereas it does contain its own challenges and hurdles, has been a rather fruitful course for me. Another thing is that most people ask me what kind of a research process have I gone through with most of my books. Now, I'll take The Raven's Call in particular, and I'll tell you that The Raven's Call is set in the 1890s, in 1898 in particular, and it sort of travels back and forth in time as well. And I have had to do a lot of research, because this is a piece of detective fiction, so I've had to do a lot of research into 19th century criminology and some of the notable cases of the time. So Jack the Ripper is mentioned numerous times in the book. And there have been some cases regarding maidservants committing murders, as well as doctors committing murders, very high profile 19th century cases. And some of the things that I've actually mentioned in the book are based on those cases. So I've had to do a lot of research on that. I've had to do a lot of research on costumes, the sort of cuisines that people would enjoy at the time. In creating Griffin Vale, which is the country house where all of the events take place, I've had to look into country houses in the UK and what life was like over there in the 1800s, or the late 1800s rather, and the sort of the relationship between the upper class and the servants, and how that sort of led to conflicts and scandals as well. So a lot of that is actually found in The Raven's Call. In terms of key themes, apart from the Gothic theme and the sort of binary oppositions of sort of science versus superstition, good versus evil, a lot of the themes that you see in traditional Gothic books such as Dracula, or even books like The Woman in White and Rebecca, you'll see a lot of that here. I mean, the Raven itself is reminiscent of Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. And some people have actually asked me whether my book was actually inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's poem, and the answer to that is no, it wasn't inspired. The only thing that did inspire me was the Raven itself. But my book has nothing whatsoever to do with any of the previous Gothic works. It's an original story, completely conjured from my own imagination. And as you may know, that the raven has a significance of being a bad omen. It presages something bad in folklore, and it is a supernatural entity. So similar to that idea, the raven in this book also presages sort of misfortunes for the characters. But then there is a twist, as is with most Gothic characters and with a lot of the Gothic narratives as well. You have villainous characters, but then there's always some sort of good in them, and then you've got the good characters with some sort of a villainous nature under that shiny veneer. So there's always a Jekyll and Hyde theme going on in Gothic books, especially those in Victorian society, because in Victorian society respectability was the norm, and that is what covered the faults and the inadequacies of many in the society, especially the upper classes. Where I have discussed Jack the Ripper, the themes of poverty in Victorian England, as well as the injustices and prostitution in the East End, has also been highlighted in this book. In fact, what drives Detective Eldridge, the protagonist, throughout the narrative are two fundamental things that have happened in his life. The first is what happens at the very beginning of the book, which is that he has witnessed an execution of a young woman, a foreigner, who has been a prostitute and who has worked at numerous households as a maid, and she was sort of forced into murdering her brutal master. And Detective Eldridge sort of questions the idea of fairness and justice and poverty, and whether he can sort of right a wrong. This is one thing that drives him throughout the book. The other thing, more than anything else, is the fact that he witnessed his own wife being murdered, who had just declared that she was expecting their first child. And again, this is something that sort of that creates compassion and sympathy in him for other characters, especially for some of the female characters in the book, which you'll get to see later on in the course of the narrative. Now, there are two main narrators. So I have spoken about Detective Eldridge, who is a very Sherlock Holmes / Poirot type of a character. He is sharp. He's kind, the way Poirot is. He's very compassionate. He's driven by things from his past. He's also very paternal and very sensible in his approach. And again, he's somebody who acts not only as a detective but also as a judge. And this is something that you'll get to see once you reach the sort of climax of the book. The second narrator is a character called Simone, who is of Indian origin. And she appears to be a minor character in the book, but as you read the book, you will get to see that she, in fact, is one of the main characters and she plays one of the pivotal roles in The Raven's Call. Another theme that I'd like to highlight over here is sort of the British Raj, or the British Empire, which was at its peak in the 1890s. And the book does, to a large extent, address some of the prejudices on either side, the British side and the resentment from the Indian side. And you'll get to see a lot of prejudices from the character of General Hardwicke, and the sort of torn character that he is, and then the resentment and the sort of a retaliation from the character of Simone as well. So that is something that's extremely interesting. When we talk about some of the characters in the book, you will see that the characters of Detective Eldridge, in particular Simone, and a few other characters that I won't mention at this stage because they are mystery characters, sort of come to life when you read them. Somebody who reviewed the book actually said that it was a pleasure to have known Detective Eldridge. And I was extremely impressed with that review, because though I created him and though I wrote about him, it really was a pleasure on my part as well to get to know someone like him. And I also have to say at this juncture that being a writer, you initially start with a one-page synopsis or a plot, which is what I did. But the actual narrative itself was nothing like that original synopsis. It changed time and time again. And the way Detective Eldridge's character simply evolved was really beautiful, as well as the other characters as well. So I would say that if you do decide to read the book, you will find that some of the characters are extremely memorable. Once you finish the book, they will stay with you. I've also been asked time and time again about what is next and whether I have any plans of sort of sending my work to producers, or whether I'd like my book to be adapted as a movie. And the answer to that question is yes. My original idea, of course, or my original ambition was, of course, to create a movie, but then most movies, films, or even theatrical productions are based on books. And the way that I've written The Raven's Call, the sort of language that I've used, and the sort of transitions that I've made from one chapter to another, when you actually read it, it is very graphic cinematically, and you can imagine it as a movie. And I have been reaching out to producers locally as well as abroad, and hopefully in due course there are chances that The Raven's Call might be adapted into a cinematic adaptation. And it has a lot of potential to be to be adapted as a movie. The snowy setting, for one. The Victorian setting, of course, is a very dreamy setting, and it's extremely unique. If you look at some of the BBC productions that are set in Victorian England, because they take you back sort of 200 or so years in the past, with carriages and with those gas lamps and with those secluded houses which are sort of devoid of technological advances, they all create a dreamy existence that we cannot imagine living in modern times. And I think that any book that is set in Victorian times, with elements of a mystery, with elements of unrequited love or forbidden love, is the sort of setting or the sort of movie with such extraordinary themes that does take a modern viewer or a modern reader into a completely different dimension. So thank you so much to listening. Thank you so much for listening to this talk on The Raven's Call. And once again, it is available on Amazon, and the paperback versions are available at Liberty Books. If you have any further questions with regards to the book or the next steps, or if you'd like any tips from me, you can leave the comments in the comment section below, or you can always also find me on Facebook. My author page is called Sana Pirzada author page, and you can send your questions there. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy reading The Raven's Call. Thank you.